Before there were villages, before there were weddings, before anyone's parents ever said, "You may kiss the bride," two strangers standing on opposite sides of a fire 30,000 years ago still had to answer the same question you're asking right now. How do I know this is the right person? There was no app to swipe, no priest, no family group chat. Just a fire, a handful of nervous glances, and rules older than language itself. And here's the uncomfortable part. Some of those unspoken rules are still running in your head today, every single time you decide whether to text someone back. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at a first date the same way again. To understand how people found partners, you first have to understand how people actually lived. For almost all of human history, we're talking 95% of it, there were no villages at all. Just small, moving bands of 20 to 40 people walking from place to place, following animals and seasons. Everyone in that band usually knew everyone else since birth, which sounds cozy until you realize the problem it creates. If your only options for a partner are the same 20 to 40 people you grew up calling brother, sister, cousin, and uncle, you have a serious problem.
Anthropologists have a name for this danger. It's called genetic isolation. Small, closed groups that only mate within themselves get sicker, weaker, and eventually die out. Nature punishes it ruthlessly. So early humans developed one of the most important social rules in our entire history. Long before writing, before farming, before religion. You do not marry within your own band. It's called exogamy, literally, marriage outside. This single rule changed everything. It meant every band had to solve a new problem. How do you meet people from somewhere else? When somewhere else might be 100 miles away, guarded by strangers who might just as easily spear you as greet you.
So bands did something remarkably clever. At certain times of the year, when a river was full of fish, or fruit trees were ripe, or the weather allowed easy travel, multiple bands would agree, sometimes generations in advance, to meet in the same place. Historic hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza of Tanzania or Aboriginal Australians held exactly these kinds of seasonal gatherings. Hundreds of people, sometimes from bands who had never met, would suddenly find themselves camped side by side for weeks. There was feasting, there was music, there was dancing long into the night, and for the first time in a young person's life, there were faces they had never seen before.
This is where two boys and girl actually meet. Not through introduction, not through arrangement. Just a glance across a crowded fire. And here's something fascinating. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have found that initial attraction often worked exactly like it does today. A quick, almost instinctive read of someone's face, posture, and energy. Long before anyone spoke a single word, the brain had already made a snap judgment. But attraction alone wasn't enough to build a life on. The real test was still coming. In most hunter-gatherer societies, attraction was only step one. What really mattered was demonstrated ability. Could this person actually keep you alive? For men, this often meant hunting skill. A successful hunt wasn't just about food, it was a public resume. Anthropologists studying groups like the Ache of Paraguay found that skilled hunters had more marriage opportunities, not because of the meat itself, but because skill signaled reliability, intelligence, and generosity. Since good hunters were expected to share their kill with the whole camp, not just their own family. But it wasn't only about hunting, and it wasn't only about men proving themselves. Women demonstrated their own critical skills. foraging knowledge that could account for most of a band's daily calories, deep knowledge of medicinal plants, weaving, and childcare experience. And both men and women had another powerful tool: performance. Dancing, singing, storytelling, and even body art and scarification were used to display creativity, health, and confidence. Some researchers, including evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller, have argued that art and music themselves may have evolved largely because they were such effective courtship displays. In other words, showing off has always been part of the plan.
Now here's the part that surprises most people. Even with all this personal attraction and personal skill on display, the couple rarely had the final say, at least not alone. Elders and family members often played a major role, checking kinship lines to avoid forbidden matches, weighing whether a union would strengthen alliances between bands, and sometimes negotiating an exchange of gifts, of resources, or even of a sibling, in a practice called sister exchange, still recorded among some Aboriginal Australian groups. It wasn't cold or unemotional, it was practical. Marriage wasn't just about two people, it was a survival contract between two entire communities.
But make no mistake, this wasn't forced marriage in most cases. Anthropological records, from the Ju-Huansi of the Kalahari to countless other documented societies, show that outright refusal was common and respected. A daughter or son could, and often did, say no. There are even recorded traditions of elopement, young couples slipping away from camp together to force the issue, betting that love, once acted on, would eventually be accepted. So the final answer to how did people choose each other before villages is this: through attraction, through demonstrated skill, through family negotiation, and ultimately, through the same stubborn, hopeful human choice we still make today. Thousands of years later, those wandering bands settled. Fires became villages, villages became towns, and eventually, towns became the cities we live in today. But look closely, and the same ancient pattern is still running underneath everything. We still size someone up in seconds. We still show off our skills, just on a resume or an Instagram feed instead of a hunting ground. We still involve family, friends, and community in the biggest decision of our lives. The fire has changed. The dance has changed. But the question a person asks themselves before choosing a partner has barely changed at all in 50,000 years. If this kind of hidden history fascinates you, subscribe, because there's a lot more of it buried under everything we think is modern.